Stop what you're doing right now. In the past 3 years, the world's most powerful central banks have quietly spent $260 billion on one asset. Not technology stocks, not government bonds, it's not real estate. Gold. Over 2,000 tons in just 2022 and 2023, the most aggressive central bank gold buying spree in 73 years. And here's the terrifying part. They're accelerating. The first 3 quarters of 2024 saw another 1,500 tons purchased, putting them on track to buy over 1,000 tons for the 3rd consecutive year. We're talking about institutions that don't gamble. The People's Bank of China, the Reserve Bank of India, Central Bank of Russia, the National Bank of Poland, Turkey's Central Bank, Singapore, the Czech Republic. Even obscure nations you've never heard of are stockpiling gold as if it's the last safe harbor before a financial tsunami. Central banks don't panic buy assets because of social media hype. They don't chase trends. These institutions employ armies of PhD economists who've dissected every currency collapse in recorded history. They have access to classified intelligence on capital flows, trade settlements, sovereign debt crises, and geopolitical flashpoints that will never reach public channels. When institutions controlling trillions of dollars simultaneously pivot to the same asset, they're not diversifying their portfolios. They're preparing for something catastrophic. What are they preparing for? The systematic collapse of the US dollar, the deliberate erasure of $37 trillion in American debt through the oldest financial magic trick ever. Devised currency, devaluation, disguised as gold revaluation. It's the exact same playbook Franklin Roosevelt executed in 1933. You're about to witness it unfold in real time. In this video, I'm going to reveal exactly what central banks see that retail investors are blind to. The classified intelligence driving their decisions, the precise timeline they're following, the wealth transfer mechanism already in motion, and most critically, what you must do immediately to survive what's coming. Because once the revaluation executes and the dollar implodes, there's no second chance. You'll either be positioned alongside the central banks, or you'll be financial collateral with the masses holding worthless paper currency. Let me hit you with the raw data, because what's unfolding right now has no modern precedent. According to the World Gold Council, the official tracker of institutional gold purchases, central banks acquired 1,036 tons in 2022, followed by 1,037 tons in 2023. Through Q3 of 2024, they've already accumulated 789 tons, with Q4 projections pushing the annual total past 1,000 tons yet again. That's 3 consecutive years of 1,000-ton-plus buying. To understand how extreme this is, consider that before 2022. The previous record for annual central bank gold purchases was 656 tons in 2018. Before that spike, you'd have to rewind all the way to 1950 to find comparable buying volume. We have officially entered uncharted financial territory. But it's not just about volume. It's about who's buying and why the urgency. China's People's Bank of China added 62 tons in November 2023 alone. They reported consistent monthly additions for 18 straight months, ending in May 2024. Then the reporting suddenly stopped. Not because China stopped accumulating gold, it's because they don't want the world tracking how much they're hoarding. Conservative analyst estimates suggest China added 300 to 500 tons to official reserves over the past 2 years. But here's the part nobody discusses publicly. Those figures only represent the reserves. China officially reports to the International Monetary Fund. Behind the scenes, Chinese state-owned enterprises are purchasing gold. The State Administration of Foreign Exchange is buying. Sovereign wealth funds and government investment vehicles that operate outside World Gold Council oversight are acquiring massive positions. When you aggregate every channel, China has likely accumulated between 1,000 and 2,000 tons since 2022. And the buying isn't slowing. It's intensifying. Why such aggressive accumulation? Because China's financial strategists see exactly what's approaching. The dollar system is terminal. And when it collapses, the nation holding the most gold will dominate the new financial order. Russia's central bank purchased 330 tons in 2022 alone, making them the single largest national buyer that year. They've maintained aggressive purchasing through 2023 and 2024, despite enduring the most punishing economic sanctions in modern history. or more accurately, because of those sanctions. Consider the brutal lesson Russia learned. In 2022, Western nations froze $300 billion of Russian dollar-denominated assets overnight. $300 billion Russia believed was safely stored in Western banks, and securities instantly seized, weaponized, gone. Now put yourself in the position of any other nation watching this precedent. China currently holds over $1 trillion in U.S. Treasury securities. What prevents the United States from freezing Chinese assets the moment a conflict erupts over Taiwan? The legal and political precedent is now established. So what lesson has every central bank on earth extracted from Russia's experience? Simple. Never hold assets denominated in currencies that hostile powers can freeze. Hold something physically beyond their reach. Gold. Physical gold bars sitting in secured vaults in Beijing, Moscow, New Delhi. The United States cannot freeze it, cannot digitally seize it, cannot sanction atoms of elemental gold. Once you physically possess it, it's yours permanently. Russia now officially holds 2,333 tons of gold, representing approximately 25% of their total foreign reserves. That's the highest gold percentage among major economies. For comparison, the United States holds roughly 23% of its reserves in gold based on official book valuations. Russia has positioned itself more heavily in gold than America has. That positioning is neither accidental nor experimental. It's strategic preparation. Russia's economic planners lived through the Soviet Union's implosion. They watched the ruble become worthless paper in 1991. They've now experienced Western financial warfare firsthand. They're not accumulating gold because they predict price appreciation. They restockpiling gold because they re-preparing for a future where dollars are worthless, and gold is the only reserve asset that commands universal value. India's Reserve Bank has been methodically adding to reserves quarter after quarter. They purchased 33 tons in 2022, followed by 41 tons in 2023. The buying continues every single quarter without exception. The volumes aren't dramatic relative to China or Russia, but the consistency reveals strategic intent. India now officially holds 841 tons. But here's the staggering reality most analysts miss. Indian households privately own more gold than any government on the planet. Conservative estimates place private Indian gold holdings between 25,000 and 30,000 tons. That exceeds the United States government's holdings, exceeds China's holdings, exceeds the combined holdings of every Western central bank. India, as a unified nation, combining public institutions and private citizens, controls more gold than anyone else on earth, and both the government and the population are still accumulating. Why this cultural obsession with gold? Because Indians have survived multiple currency devaluations across generations. The rupee has been systematically devalued numerous times throughout modern history. Both Indian families and India's central banking authorities understand from lived experience that when paper currencies fail, gold endures. It's not academic theory. It's ancestral knowledge transmitted through families over centuries. And that ancient wisdom is being validated in real time as the dollar system destabilizes. Poland's national bank bought 130 tons across 2022 and 2023. For a nation of Poland's economic size, that's an enormous position. They increased holdings from 229 tons in 2021 to 359 tons by the end of 2023. 57% expansion in just 24 months. The governor of Poland's national bank, Adam Glepewski, stated publicly and unambiguously that gold represents the ultimate safe haven asset and that Poland is actively preparing for increased global monetary system instability. Read that statement again carefully. Sitting central bank governor isn't speaking in vague diplomatic language. He's explicitly admitting their positioning for systemic financial breakdown. He's openly telling you what Poland's intelligence reveals. The current global monetary architecture is going to fracture. Translation: the dollar is going to collapse, and Poland refuses to be caught unprepared. Turkey's central bank added 160 tons in 2023 alone. Turkey isn't preparing for theoretical future crisis. They're living through currency collapse right now. The Turkish lira has been decimated against the dollar. Inflation peaked at 85% in 2022. When you're experiencing hyperinflation in real time, gold becomes the only logical refuge. Turkey's central bankers understand this viscerally because they're managing the crisis as it unfolds. And they're positioning for the next devastating phase when conditions deteriorate further. Singapore's monetary authority has been accumulating gold with characteristic discretion. They don't publish monthly holding updates like some nations, but IMF data confirms significant tonnage additions. Singapore manages its reserves with more analytical sophistication than virtually any country. When Singapore allocates capital to gold, it's never random. They've identified a specific threat, and Singapore's track record of financial decisions is essentially flawless. Here's what unifies all these seemingly independent decisions. Every single central bank is preparing for the identical event: the end of dollar hegemony, the collapse of the existing monetary order, and the chaotic transition into whatever system emerges from the ruins. They don't know the precise architecture of the replacement system. Perhaps a BRICS gold-backed currency? Perhaps a weighted basket of currencies? Perhaps IMF's special drawing rights restructured with new members? Perhaps something that hasn't been publicly announced yet? But they know with certainty it won't be dollar-dominated. And during the violent transition from the dying system to the emerging one, gold is the only asset that commands universal acceptance across all nations and ideologies. You can't seamlessly trade Chinese yuan for Russian rubles in large volumes. Currency swap agreements are politically complex. Exchange rates fluctuate wildly based on economic conditions and geopolitical tensions. Trading relationships depend on constantly shifting diplomatic alliances. But every nation on Earth accepts gold without hesitation. It's the ultimate neutral reserve asset that transcends politics, sanctions, and monetary policy. This is why central banks are buying at volumes unseen in 73 years. They're not making portfolio adjustments. They're preparing for the great reserve currency transition. And that transition is being dramatically accelerated by something most people are completely ignoring: the deliberate weaponization of dollar dominance. For decades, the United States has systematically weaponized the dollar's reserve currency status. The strategy is brutally simple. If you don't comply with U.S. foreign policy objectives, America cuts you off from dollar clearing systems. They freeze your sovereign assets. They sanction your banks. They make it functionally impossible for you to participate in international trade. This coercive system worked effectively for generations because there was no viable alternative. Every nation needed dollars to survive in the global economy. But now the calculus has fundamentally shifted. Nations have reached their breaking point, and they're actively constructing parallel financial systems that completely bypass dollar dependency. Let me show you what's happening behind closed doors that mainstream financial media refuses to cover. The BRICS nations Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa have been developing plans to launch a gold-backed currency since 2022. This isn't fringe conspiracy theory. This is official government policy being developed by nations representing 40% of global population and 25% of world GDP. At the August 2023 BRICS summit in Johannesburg, the bloc announced a historic expansion, inviting 6 new members: Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Some accepted immediately. Others are still evaluating. But the expansion is moving forward inexorably. Here's what this means in practical terms. BRICS is constructing a parallel financial architecture, system independent of dollar clearing, system that doesn't route through Western banking infrastructure, system that's completely immune to U.S. sanctions. And the foundational backing of this system is gold. Here's the operational mechanism. Each BRICS member nation contributes gold reserves to a collective fund. The gold backs a new currency unit used exclusively for international trade between member states. When China purchases oil from Russia, they settle the transaction in BRICS currency backed by gold. When India buys commodities from Brazil, they use BRICS currency. When Saudi Arabia, if they formally join sells petroleum to China, the transaction clears in gold-backed BRICS currency. No dollars involved at any stage. This systematically destroys the petrodollar system that has sustained American financial dominance since 1974. The original petrodollar agreement was elegantly simple. Saudi Arabia agreed to price all oil sales exclusively in U.S. dollars. In exchange, America provided military protection and advanced weapons systems. The result was permanent structural demand for dollars. Every nation that needed to purchase oil, which means every industrialized economy, needed dollars. That created infinite demand that allowed the US to print unlimited dollars without triggering immediate domestic inflation, because those excess dollars were absorbed globally. But if Saudi Arabia begins accepting Chinese yuan or BRICS currency for oil sales, the petrodollar dies instantly. Dollar demand collapses, and all those trillions of overseas dollars come flooding back into the United States. That's when domestic inflation explodes catastrophically. This isn't theoretical speculation. It's happening right now in real transactions. In March 2023, Saudi Arabia completed its first oil sale to China, settled entirely in yuan, not dollars. Yuan that represented the first structural crack in the petrodollar system. Since that breakthrough, the cracks have widened. Russia and India now trade bilaterally in rubles and rupees. China and Brazil have established yuan real trading channels. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations is developing a regional payment platform specifically designed to bypass dollar settlement. Every single one of these bilateral agreements reduces global dollar usage. Every reduction in dollar dependency brings us measurably closer to systemic collapse. This is why central banks are panic buying gold, because they know the BRICS gold-backed currency is launching imminently, probably in 2025 or 2026. And when it officially launches, it will immediately challenge dollar supremacy. Every nation that resents us financial imperialism will have a credible alternative for the first time in 50 years. They will use it aggressively. Now let me reveal the mechanism of how this collapses the dollar and magically erases US government debt. This is where the financial engineering becomes truly sophisticated. The United States government currently owes $37 trillion. The debt-to-GDP ratio has reached 132%. Annual interest payments alone now consume $1.2 trillion more than the entire defense budget. This debt cannot be repaid through conventional means. You cannot tax your way out of 132% debt to GDP. You cannot grow your way out when debt compounds faster than economic growth. You cannot cut spending enough when interest payments alone consume 5% of GDP. There is only one option remaining: deliberate devaluation. But you cannot simply print money openly because that triggers immediate panic and hyperinflation. You need a more sophisticated approach. You need to appear to be strengthening the dollar while actually destroying it. So the way you execute that is through gold revaluation. Here's the playbook, and it's the exact strategy Roosevelt deployed in 1933. The U.S. government officially holds 8,133 tons of gold, approximately 261 million ounces. At current market prices around $2,700 per ounce, that gold is worth roughly $705 billion. But here's the critical accounting trick. That gold is valued on the government's official books at $42 per ounce. That's the statutory price established in 1973 and never adjusted. On paper, U.S. gold reserves are worth only $11 billion, not $705 billion, $11 billion. This creates massive room for accounting revaluation. Watch what happens when they exploit it. The U.S. government announces a return to partial gold backing for the dollar. Not a classical gold standard, where every paper dollar is redeemable for physical gold. That would be impossible. But a partial backing system, where the dollar is supported by a percentage of gold reserves. This announcement sounds conservative. It sounds like sound money policy. Gold advocates celebrate it. Hard money proponents praise it. But it's a trap. Because to credibly claim the dollar is backed by gold, you need sufficient gold relative to the money supply. The M2 money supply currently stands at $21 trillion. The U.S. holds gold worth $705 billion at current market prices. That's only 3.4% backing. You cannot credibly market the dollar as gold-backed when it's only 3.4% supported. Nobody would believe that claim. But if you revalue gold from the statutory $42 per ounce to $20,000 per ounce, suddenly you have $5.2 trillion in gold reserves on paper. It represents 25% backing of M2. Now you can legitimately market the dollar as gold-backed. You can sell it as a return to sound money principles. You can position America as the financially responsible superpower. But what you've actually done is revalue gold by 476 times from the statutory price. And you've implicitly devalued the dollar by 87% relative to gold. Because if gold rises from $2,700 to $20,000, the dollar has lost 87% of its purchasing power relative to gold, which means it's losing equivalent value relative to everything else: food, energy, housing, all commodities. And here's the genius of this scheme. The U.S. government's $37 trillion debt is denominated in dollars. Those dollars are now worth 87% less in real purchasing power terms. So the real debt burden measured in actual economic value falls from $37 trillion to approximately $4.8 trillion. They've effectively erased $32 trillion in debt obligations, not by paying it. By devaluing the currency those obligations are denominated in. They've systematically stolen $32 trillion from creditors, bondholders, pension funds, and dollar savers, and transferred it to themselves through reduced debt burden. This is the strategy. This is what central banks see coming. This is why they're buying gold before the official revaluation happens. Let me show you the historical precedent because this exact playbook has been successfully executed before. In 1933, America was drowning in debt from World War I and the Great Depression. The debt-to-GDP ratio had reached 40% and was climbing rapidly. Deflation was destroying the economy. Banks were failing in waves. Unemployment had hit 25%. The entire system was collapsing. President Franklin Roosevelt needed a dramatic solution, and he chose gold revaluation. In April 1933, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102, making it illegal for American citizens to own gold. Citizens were ordered to surrender their gold to the government. The government paid $20.67 per ounce, the official fixed price that had been maintained since 1879. Most Americans complied. They turned in their gold and received paper dollars in exchange. Then in January 1934, after the government had successfully collected most privately held gold, Roosevelt announced the revaluation. The new official price was set at $35 per ounce, a 69% increase overnight. Here's what this accomplished. The U.S. government now controlled most of the nation's gold supply. At the old price of $20.67, their reserves were worth approximately $4 billion. At the new price of $35, those identical reserves were suddenly worth $6.8 billion. They created $2.8 billion in value through nothing but accounting adjustment. But the real impact was on sovereign debt. The debt the government owed was denominated in dollars. Those dollars were now worth significantly less relative to gold. The gold revaluation triggered inflation. Nominal prices rose. Nominal wages increased. But real purchasing power decreased. The real burden of government debt fell dramatically. By 1940, the debt-to-GDP ratio had declined from 40% to 25%. Not because they paid off debt, but because they inflated it away through currency debasement, disguised as gold revaluation. And American citizens who had obediently turned in their gold at $20.67 and watched it get revalued to $35. They lost 40% of their purchasing power instantly. They couldn't repurchase the gold at the new price. Gold ownership remained illegal for U.S. citizens until 1974. They were trapped holding devalued paper dollars, while the government used their confiscated gold to erase debt and enrich itself. This is not ancient monetary history. This is the exact playbook being prepared for deployment right now. And central banks recognize it because they've studied this history exhaustively. They know what the U.S. did in 1933. They know it worked perfectly. They know it's about to happen again. Only this time, the revaluation won't be from $20 to $35. It will be from $2,700 to $20,000 or higher. Here's your action plan. First, decide your allocation immediately. Calculate your liquid net worth, not your house, not your car, your investable liquid assets. Target 10% to 20% in gold for a $100,000 portfolio. Yes. $10,000 to $20,000. Allocate 70% to physical gold 1-ounce coins or bars from reputable dealers like APMEX, JM Bullion, or SD Bullion. Buy bullion only, not collectibles. Store it in a secure private vault, not a bank-safe deposit box that can be frozen. Allocate 20% to gold ETFs like GLD or IAU for retirement accounts. Allocate 10% to gold mining stocks for leverage. The timeline is 2025 to 2027. Phase 1 is happening, now final accumulation. Phase 2 hits mid-2025 to 2026, when BRICS launches the gold-backed currency. Phase 3 is 2027 to 2028, when the crisis forces U.S. revaluation. The window to position is closing. Once gold is officially revalued to $20,000 per ounce, your dollars will have lost 87% of their purchasing power. You'll either be positioned with the central banks who bought at $2,700, or you'll be collateral damage. Central banks have spent $260 billion positioning over 3 years. They see what's coming. Now you know too. The only question is whether you'll act.